During a program, it may be required to disable your servos for an amount of time. And this is very applicable if you have a robot that is going to be moving into an unknown zone. So let's say like in autonomous mode, if you aren't using your servos, or if you only use your servos for an amount of time, you should disable your servos after that in case you hit another robot or something gets in the way where the servo can't get to that position like we were talking about before. It'd also be a good idea to have a disable servos button on your controller for driver operated mode. In case one gets stuck, you can disable it. You know you're not going to break anything if you can't use that servo. So here is a simple example where we're going to show how to do that. I have one servo called servo. I'm also going to have a target, so we're going to, as we get farther into this example, we're going to move the target of the servo, move the position. That servo is called left in my configuration file. And the first thing I'm going to do is set position to 0.5, which is the target up here, the initial target. And that's going to be before the program actually starts. So I can select my program servo disable, I'll say int, and then I'll move to that position. And right now it's enabled. Whenever the servo position changes, the servo controller automatically goes and enables all the servos. You can only enable all the servos or disable all the servos. You can't do one at a time. So that's what that did. Here I have a status. That is just a method I created down at the bottom, which will display the PWM status and the target. And we're getting the PWM status from the controller itself. We're not just remembering what it is. So we can say the servo, the controller the servo is on, we're going to get the PWM status. And if the status is disabled, we're going to say PWM is disabled and what target value is. Otherwise, it'll be enabled, and we'll say it is enabled and the target value. And I made that because I'm using the status many times throughout. When the program starts, as long as the gamepad buttons A and B are not pushed, we're going to cycle for 1 second. We're going to have the PWM disabled, and then we're going to have it enabled. The target's not changing. It's always the same target. It's just going to be disabled and enabled. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So we're going to push the play button. And on the screen, I have it displaying. So you can copy and paste this program over, and you'll see on the screen, it'll say enabled, disabled, enabled, disabled. And you can see that I push on this, and it'll move back. Move back. So it's enabled when it's making that humming sound, trying to move past where my thumb is stopping it. And it's disabled when I'm able to push it again. So that's simply that part of the program. Now if we press A or B, the program is going to continue on to the second while loop, and this while loop is going to go as long as we don't press X. So if we press X, it's going to go back to doing that cycle back and forth, back and forth. And that's as simple as it is to enable and disable the servos. Here, if you press A or B, it's going to see if you pressed A or if you pressed B. If you pressed A, it's going to enable the servo and it's going to keep it enabled. Press B is going to disable the servo and keep it disabled. Now I have another condition here. If you move the right joystick in the X direction, then it's going to change the target and then set the position. And by setting the position, it automatically enables all the servos. And then we're going to wait 1 hardware cycle. In all these, it's updating the status on the screen. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So press A, then it will enable the servo and still displaying the target, and it's just going to stay there. If I press B, it's going to disable the servo, and then I can move the servo freely. So this way, if anything's pushing on it, if it can't get to the position it wants to go to, the servo is not going to break. So after your match, you're still going to have a functional robot. After you get out of the way, whatever was in the way of the robot, whatever it was. Then if I move the the right joystick in the X direction, it will enable the servo, and it's also changing the target. So it's not at 0.5 anymore. Right now it's at 1. And if I move it just a little bit, it'll move slowly. So what this is doing is it's taking the target and it's adding the joystick value to the target. So I have negative on the left and I have positive on the right. So it's adding a move to the right, and it's subtracting when I go to the left because it's a negative number. Now initially, when we created this, it was actually moving way too fast. I could touch it, and the whole servo would move all the way over right away. And there are two things we did to fix this. One thing, we'll look back at our program here, one thing that we did is we're waiting for one full hardware cycle after we set that position and do the status. So that's going to make sure that at least the updated target value gets to the servo before we update it again, because otherwise we may update that target value 15 times before the value actually gets to the servo. The other thing we did is we made the gamepad more sensitive in the middle. So by taking the gamepad right stick X times gamepad right stick X times gamepad right stick X, it is making it more sensitive in the middle of the in the middle of the range. So the graph is going to be an exponential going up. So in the middle, it's going to be really sensitive, but on the outside, we still have 1 and negative 1. So it's not decreasing our ranges. So this is a really simple way to have a more sensitive middle spot of the joysticks. I really recommend that. And the reason we multiplied it 3 times and not 2 times is that we still have the negative and positive numbers. So you can multiply it 5 times if you want to be even more sensitive in the middle, but not 2 or 4, because when you get rid of your negative number, it's always going to be positive when you move to the right or to the left. So in this example, we talked about how to disable your servos. You can say servo, the controller, disable, so it's going to disable the entire controller, or enable the entire controller. We also talked about how to ask your controller if it is disabled or enabled. So you can say, if this controller with this servo, get the status. If it's disabled, then it's disabled, otherwise it's enabled. You can also say servo controller PWM status enabled. We also talked about how to change the target of your servo. So you can use the buttons or the joysticks and say that target equals target plus this value for as long as it's pressed.